sure to start recording. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Depending on how we're all gonna go, we're gonna target at about an hour to go through the presentation. Um, I do ask people to ask questions as we're going along rather than kind of saving it to the very end. And if it goes a little too crazy with the questions, well, maybe we'll figure out the time. All right, for now, please feel free to ask questions. Just start talking, just because there's too many people in the call and it's hard to see who's raising their hand, who is asking a question. So if you can just unmute yourself and then just ask the question if you have any questions along the way. Okay. All right. So again, as Greg mentioned, my name is Marion Viray. My main goal in the Starr Career Development Center is mainly to help with the programming for alumni, but I also do other things. I'm an adjunct there, so I only work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but my main role is to organize and facilitate workshops like this. And I've been at Starr for about 8 years now. And in the fall, we'll be launching this new program. It's a tech leadership program, and that's something that I'll be spearheading. But mainly, I work with students and alumni one-on-one to sort of, transition into a new role, a new career, whatever it is that they need to do, whatever is going on with their career. So for now, obviously, given the situation, we're experiencing a lot of people who are having a little change with what's going on with COVID nowadays. So I feel like that is what's happening. And I think this program is a great way to sort of increase your marketability when it's time for you to transition, whatever that may be. So today, this sort of workshop came about, a few years ago. I've been in career counseling for over 20 years. And I would say in about when I transitioned from my second job, when I was applying for another sort of a more prestigious position where it was more tenure, it's in a tenure role. A lot of it, they were asking me to. I remember they had asked if I had a copy of my my master's degree diploma, and I had remembered my mom had asked me that she wanted to frame it, but what happened was she ended up framing it on a piece of slab of marble. So what happens, of course, when it's almost impossible to photocopy that. And at the time, 20 plus years ago, it was hard to get a copy of your diploma, not much like it is today. So, and so I would say that was the birth of this workshop. I realized how important to have a copy of everything that you need to have. And so the career portfolio that we're really going to be talking about today is really a physical sort of portfolio, and it's going to look like this. And there's some pictures of slides. It's going to look sort of like, of course, a picture of like a portfolio page like this. So it's more of a physical portfolio that we're really going to be talking about today, and how this portfolio is going to help you sort of with your professional development, how it's going to help you with your networking, and it's sort of how you can use it for interviewing. So those are sort of the three things. So we're not talking about today online portfolio. We're really going to focus on the physical paper portfolio, and we'll talk about that. So the online portfolio is very different than the physical one. So just wanted to make that clear about the difference between physical portfolio versus online portfolio. Okay. All right. So from this picture, normally with this workshop, we try to be more engaging, but with online and so many people, it's hard to do that. But you can see from this picture, there's a group of people on the back, and you see this person being interviewed. So when you're applying for a job, whether it's in the Northeast area or in California or wherever in the Midwest, always know that there's always other people in line for the position. So it's really very important to understand that you should always bring your A game wherever you're going, whether it's a networking event, whether you're interviewing somewhere. Just be mindful that it's never just you. So you want to make sure that you're not just bringing yourself to the interview. And I find, like from my experience, and I'll talk about anecdotes throughout the presentation, how I've used career portfolio throughout my career. I found that this is really a great way to stand out as a candidate. And it's really a great way to stand out when you're networking with professionals, whether it's to get a job or get information. This sort of gives that person that you're meeting a sense that you're taking the meeting seriously. And I find like it's been very useful for me throughout my career. And I've used career portfolio, and for everyone that I've suggested to, of course, I've gotten feedback from them, but I've used it for every interview I've had. And my career has been including in higher education. So I've worked at several universities, where I worked at Pace University, Fordham University, NYU, to a couple of CUNYs. And so I've been using career portfolio for about 15 years, whether it's networking or interviewing. and I found that it's very useful. A lot of people appreciate it. And even if they can't look at it extensively like you would when you're on your home or when you're in interviewing, but it does definitely stand out with people who bring a portfolio. And so those are the things that I'll be talking about today. And my career have included everything from academic advising to career counseling. I was a technical recruiter for Bloomberg LP, the technology company. I worked as a diversity manager for Moody's, the credit rating company, and then and a few other things. So the jobs that I've mainly used it for have been in HR, the HR related, different various HR roles and higher education roles. But the ones who I know I've worked with on and creating a portfolio with them have been pretty much every industry. So I think historically, students have been using, or professionals have been using more for like the art industry, but you realize that you really can use it, whether it's accounting, finance, technology, or higher education. Everyone could really create some form of career portfolio that they can do for themselves or for an interview. Okay, so some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. All right, I'm going to move that. 4 things are what's the purpose. We'll talk about what a career portfolio is, but we're going to talk about the purpose of a career portfolio. We'll talk about the benefits of it, the content that should be included in it, the difference between like a home career portfolio that's for yourself versus one that you would bring to an interview or a networking event. So we'll talk about sort of the difference in that and sort of how do you actually use it in those meetings. So those are the 4 things that we're mainly going to talk about today. So the first thing is, what is a career portfolio? So in a nutshell, it's basically a collection of materials, professional, personal, academic. So I would say that it sort of rounds up into 3 things. Like your academic backgrounds. We'll talk about your professional background, all your experiences, and it'll talk about your personal, any community, any leadership, any things that you do. Those are the 3 things. And I find that if you have a portfolio, it's a place where you can sort of put things. It's a place that you know that you're always going to put all those things that I just mentioned, and that's basically a binder in a nutshell. And that's what I would keep referring to as the home portfolio. And that is very different than an interview portfolio or different than a networking portfolio. We'll talk about the differences along the way. All right. So again, what is a portfolio? It's a collection of these 3 things. And it's basically, the physical one is a visual representation of you. So when you are talking to an employer or a professional, whether it's networking or interviewing, this is a way for you to sort of talk about yourself visually as you're talking along. Because when you talk to people, you can always tell them that you are a good leader, you have this great experience, you did this at your previous job, whatever it may be. But when they visually see it in front of them, it really does make a big difference versus if you just talking about it. And then the 3 things that I mentioned, the professional, academic, those are the 3 main things that probably will encompass your portfolio. And when I say personal, those are leadership, volunteer. There's a lot of flexibility in that, in what you would provide to a networking event or an interview. But for your home portfolio, the one that basically is just for you to see, you basically put everything in there. It's a place for you to just put everything so that it's your go-to and everything's going to be housed in there. And what I found is that, I was a research assistant in undergraduate. I went to San Diego State in undergraduate, and I went for graduate school at NYU. And what I found is that I was a research assistant for 2 years in undergraduate, and I was a research assistant for the NYU Medical Center for 2 years in grad school. And I realized that those research that I was doing, if someone asked me, I wouldn't even know really what I did in that research. Like, what did I actually do? And when you try to look it up, it takes a long time to find that information. And so what I found is, like, when I had to bring it up in an interview, it was really hard to talk about it. So the career portfolio was the way to help me sort of understand. And that's one thing that I would put is I would actually put the research that I was part of. And the first research I was part of, it was published, and it was like a 50-page document. And if I go to an interview, I'm probably not going to read that 50-page document every time I go for an interview. But what I did was I highlighted sections that I find is important moving forward. And so that if I did go to an interview, it's in my career portfolio, and I don't have to figure out where I can find this article or this journal where it's published, and I don't have to reread the journal. So that's sort of something that is included in my home portfolio, where I know I can look and turn to if I need that information. All right, so people always say, well, is it really important? You know, why when I suggest it to professionals, when I suggest it to I have a client that I'm working with now who's been in finance for a number of years, and he always says, like, well, is it really going to happen? Is it really going to make a difference? And so these are the things that I always say that, like I said, like you can talk to someone and tell them what you've done and what you're able to do, but if they visually see it in front of you, it definitely builds a lot more credibility, and that's something that I find is so important. So, for example, I remember I was being interviewed for this technical recruiting job at Bloomberg, and I remember her asking, what type of events did you organize when you were at Pace University working as a career counselor? And I said, well, I did this event, I did this event. And she was like, okay, all right. She seemed a bit interested. But when I showed her a flyer of the event that I hosted, she looked at it, but it also gave us a focus, a talking point to tell me, for her to ask me more questions about it. So I did feel like from having visually seen a flyer that I talked about an event that I hosted or created, it really made a big difference. So that visual sort of really helped in an interview for sure. So these are some of the points. The National Association of Colleges and Employers, that's what the acronym in the bottom, NACE, stands for. Is sort of they do a lot of research, and they ask about 3,000 recruiters and hiring managers, and 71% of them did respond saying that they found portfolios to be very helpful. But what the other part of it is that they found that it has to be well organized. So you can't just give me a portfolio. It has to be a tailored portfolio depending on who it is that's in front of you. So it's important to be able to be mindful what you put out there when it's a home portfolio versus a networking portfolio or an interviewing portfolio. And we'll talk about those along the way. All right, so people, again, I always say it's still not sold. This is always for me, this is a great way to prepare for an interview. For me, when I look at a job description, I start circling the responsibilities and the skills that are required of me. And I always look at my portfolio to see what I can use to back that up. And for me, instead of just thinking about it in the corner in my mind, I find a portfolio is really a great way for me to visually see, oh, I can use that to talk about this, or I can talk about that. And like I mentioned earlier, it's also a great way to get information like on a research that you might have done or a work experience. So for example, my research was that the NYU Medical Center, the Child Study Center at NYU, and there is this program that I was part of in 2000 or 99 to 2000, and now it hasn't existed for probably 15 years now. So there really isn't much information about it, but luckily I kept a few brochures from it which talked about the program and some of the statistics, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have that. So that's sort of the historical data that you might be able to find that you might not be able to find now, because maybe that program or that event or that whatever it may be doesn't exist anymore. It's not really available to you, or you don't know where to find it. So having a career portfolio where you have one place to find it makes it a lot easier. And one of the things that you can also put in a home portfolio is sort of a goal setting. And that's where the home portfolio we'll keep talking about is it's a place for you to see where you could put things. What I find is if I don't have a place that I can put things in, I find that they get kind of scattered around. And so for me, having a point place that you're going to put everything that's related to your professional development, it really helps you focus that you're going to put everything in there. So, every workshop that you presented, you might just keep it on your laptop or your desktop, but if you can print it out and sort of put it somewhere versus just relying it to be on your computer, it always helps to have that focus point. And so for me, it helps with understanding your goals, professional goals, and understanding your interests and your values. All right, so what does your actual physical portfolio look like? So for the most part, for your home portfolio, it's probably going to be, sorry, let me just, for some reason. I'm going to try to read the chat as I'm talking along, but I can definitely share the PowerPoint. What I'll do is I'll share the PowerPoint as a PDF to anyone who wants it. So in the end, I'll give you my email. You can email me and I can send you the PDF version of it. But thank you, Greg, for putting the website. The website is in there. So for career services, you just click on alumni. And then lastly, the question before I move on to the topic is, what do you suggest if you have multiple paths that you're pursuing? for me, if you are, no matter what you're trying to pursue, your home portfolio is just for you to see. So the home portfolio is everything you've ever done that you want to put in there to make sure you capture. And I'll walk through more about the home portfolio as we're talking along and what content goes in it. But the home portfolio is, imagine it as everything you've ever done in one place. So rather than relying it somewhere in your homepage, because there are times when I said, oh, where's that workshop that I did? And I have to look for it. And nowadays we're switching computers a lot more, and we're not always backing up like we would. And the information starts backing up. So I find, like, even though it's in my computer, it's sometimes hard to find. And so having it in the career portfolio makes me, I know where to go to if I need to. And so your home portfolio does not matter what you're pursuing, but when you're networking and when you're interviewing, you have to tailor your career portfolios. That will always change based on who it is that you're talking to. And we'll talk about that. We'll keep talking about that. But if you want to put any questions in the chat, I'll try to stop in a few slides along the way to answer them when necessary. Otherwise, just speak up and you can ask questions. So the home portfolio is going to be basically some form like a 3-ring binder, something big where you can put everything in there. And for me, when I tell people this, and I talked to many people, I've worked with people, a lot of people to work on their portfolio. A lot of them struggle in getting it started because they find like it has to be neat or perfect. Really, for me, just get a binder and just shove everything in there and then have a goal later to organize it. But I find like if you feel like you have to organize it from the very beginning, a lot of people don't bother doing it. So for me, if you want to just get started with it, just start collecting stuff that you've done and then put it in a binder and then worry about it later. Because I find like otherwise, if you do it the other way, trying to feel like, how am I going to organize it? How is it going to look? That becomes an obstacle and a roadblock for people in creating a portfolio. So for me to get started, just start collecting things that you want to make sure you want to include in your portfolio and not worry about how you're going to organize it first. So worry about getting those materials first rather than the way it's organized. And then once you've gotten as much content, and it's going to grow. So even if you don't feel like you have much in there or you can't find things to put in there, it's best to get started. It's going to grow as you get more and more experience. And then so you start, it's good to get started. And eventually, as you get more and more materials, you start organizing it with table of contents, dividers. All those things are for your home portfolio. And then the customized and tailored part are the ones that when you want someone to look at it for feedback. So the networking for me that I've used it for, I have a couple of mentors that I've had because I always want to know, even though I know what I want to pursue in my career, I always want to see someone perspective and how, if I'm in the right track. And that's where a mentor comes in, give you their professional feedback about you. So for me, I might say, okay, these are great experiences. These are great things I want to do. But if you're trying to network and tell someone like, hey, how do I get into this career, let's say, or how do I switch from this to this? You need someone to give you some perspective on that. And so you might bring in your portfolio and he or she might say, you know what, this is great, but you need to beef up on this, or you need to increase your experience in this. And so when you're networking with someone, when they've seen all the things that you've done versus like, hey, sit down with me over coffee and then tell me everything that you've done, they can hear you, but a lot of people are very visual. So seeing what you've done really helps them help you create a path for, depending what it is that you need their help with. So whether that's switching careers or you feel like you're stuck, should you do next? So maybe you're 5 years into your career or 10 years in your career and you just don't know where you should be going next. And so the career portfolio sort of gives you sort of that path. Let me stop before I move to the next slide. So you don't create things for the portfolio. It's just a place. You would create. So it says you don't create things for the portfolio. It's just a place to store what you've done. Yes and no. It's a place to store because that's the first step. But the portfolio should ultimately be organized. So for me to get started, just put everything in a binder for now, not worrying about the organization. But eventually, whatever time you think you have to create some form of format so it looks presentable even for yourself. So even though you know you put it in that binder somewhere, you have to have some form of, and we'll talk about this again, some divider. So for me, let me just make sure I can see because I have my background and I just, what I'm showing you. So for me, can't even move. What is, all right. So the portfolio that I have for my home portfolio, hopefully you can see this because my screen won't move this for some reason. Who knows why? It was moving a second ago, but it includes basically a front page, a cover page. And a cover page, for me, I use this Myers-Briggs type indicator, and it talks about my type in the front page. And then on top of that, I have like a table of content that I put in. And my table of content include like my diploma, my resume, my curriculum vitae, my conferences that I've presented at, and it's broken down with local, national, global presentations that have workshops that I've presented, writing samples. I teach at Pace University and I teach at NYU, and the syllabus is my course syllabus is something that I put in here, and other things like references. So I have a reference list in here so that if I'm going to interview or something, I have that reference list and I don't have to worry about getting that information in. So for me, for my home portfolio, I include everything and it has to be ultimately organized. But in the beginning, when you're starting it off, you just want to have a place you put something in. But eventually, whether it's a home portfolio that it's for yourself or a networking portfolio, it has to be somewhat organized because even it's your portfolio, you want to make sure that it's organized and you know where to find things when you need it. So, but yeah, so it's not just to store stuff. It will be a portfolio you will use, and you're going to use your home portfolio to customize it depending on who you're giving it to. So eventually when you go to an interview, you're not going to give your home portfolio. You should definitely not do that. You're only going to pick certain things from your portfolio and you're going to create a smaller portfolio. And I'll show you that in a little bit and how it's going to look from a home portfolio to an interview portfolio. All right. So here, I forgot it's the next slide. So the home portfolio pretty much will look like a 3-ring binder, like a 3-ring binder like this on the left side, the silver image. And the other portfolio, the networking will probably look a little smaller than this, but the ones that you would leave with an employer or you give to a networking professional if you wanted to, would look more something like the Mary Smith and the one on the right. So if you go to Staples, what I do is I go to Staples, we used to go to Staples back then. They basically bind it for you, and it's actually pretty inexpensive to bind a few documents. So what you do is you get content from your home portfolio and you take out the pieces that you need, whether you photocopy or reprint it, whatever you need, and then you would bind it whether it looks like the Mary Smith or the one on the right. I don't know why you're doing that. But you would make it look a lot smaller than your home portfolio. So home portfolio includes everything, and you definitely don't want to bring that to a professional or an interview because it would just be overwhelming. But if it's something you want to leave behind, it's gonna be a fraction of your home portfolio because you're tailoring it and you're picking which ones you want to make sure you would leave with the employer, right? So what goes inside it? As I mentioned, your home portfolio pretty much includes everything you want to put in there. And it should be organized in its own way. So these are some categories, some sections you can put for yourself. But when the cover letter and resume, when you are leaving it with a professional or leaving it at an interview, those are the only times when you want to make sure it's tailored. But for the most part, for me, I have a resume, and my resume is different than my CV because my CV includes my test experience, my counseling experience, my teaching experience, but that necessarily isn't articulated in my resume per se, depending on what I'm applying for. So, but these are some categories. You can definitely create categories. For me, you could even create Lynda categories. You can create, let's say, if you take Coursera courses, so those are things that you can even put in your portfolio so that you know those are things you've accomplished. And it makes it, again, what I find is very focused. And if you go to an employer and you said, oh, I know R, but the language R, but if you say that you've taken a few courses through Lynda, it makes it a lot more factual. I find it, if they see that you've taken courses, whether you know it or not, it's different. But seeing that you've taken those online courses makes it a lot more factual versus you just saying you know it. All right, so for example, so if I'm doing this is one presentation I've done. So I would, if I, in my portfolio, what I would put is I would put the front page of the PowerPoint, I'd print it like this, and in the second page, maybe behind it, print it in the back, I would just put in like 5 points, 5 things or a few things that I would talk about in the presentation. So that would be something that I would put in my home portfolio. I'll probably put in a few more slides. But if I'm leaving it with a professional during a networking event, or if I'm leaving it with an interview, I'll probably just give the front page and this second page here. But for the home portfolio, I'll definitely include a few more decks. And I might do the 3-page deck. I might look like this, but for the most part, this is something you can do for your home portfolio, right? I might put in some career readiness competencies. This is probably more specific to higher education. So if I was interviewing for higher education, this is something that I would incorporate into my portfolio to talk about, because this is something that higher education has been talking about for the last couple of years, and it's something that is jargon to them. It's very relevant in higher education. So this is definitely something I would include. And this is what I mean about tailoring content, depending what it is. I think I saw a question and it disappeared. All right, I don't know. Let's make sure. I don't know what's. I got a new laptop, and I guess it's being wonky all of a sudden. So the other thing is a SWOT analysis. So for me, when I say a career portfolio also helps you with your professional development. I know it's much more popular for people to use it for professional events and networking and interviews, but for me, it helps me sort of figure out where I've been to help me where I'm going. And part of that is, like, I have a goal sheet in my portfolio. So in case what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, I'm a very visual person. So if I have a goal sheet and I can check off or cross off, that helps me a lot in accomplishing whatever goal I'm trying to accomplish. And one of the things that I have in my career portfolio, my home one, is I sort of have like this strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, SWOT analysis to help me sort of figure out what it is I'm trying to get to. So if I'm trying to interview for something, or if I feel like, okay, I'm ready to do a next transition, this is something that I would do. And this is a sheet that I have. It doesn't look like this sheet. The sheet I have something similar to this. But this helps me sort of something that can help me with my professional development. That's where the home portfolio come in. I sort of auto-populated this for someone, like, for example, I said, let's say I'm a software engineer, but I realize I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do marketing and I'm ready to move on to something else. This is sort of like I populated what I would do, I guess, to fill out things for my own SWOT analysis. Let me just figure out why I can't, the chat. Greg, are you still there? I think he might.
Yes, I'm here, Marion.
For some reason, can you see the chat? I don't know why my chat disappeared all of a sudden.
I can see the chat. I can relay some questions to you. So
yeah.
You got one question, which was, how many do you take to a career fair?
Well, for me, I would not take them to a career fair. I would only take this to a one-on-one interview, because a career fair, you don't want to be carrying that many. So absolutely not. And really, you only have like a few minutes with an employer at a career fair. And honestly, I mean, I've done my own share of hosting career fairs to being an employer that goes to career fairs. They'll lose it. They really don't. Most career fairs are hectic and crazy. So it really would be, it'll just get lost and no one will really remember it in that way. So for me, even if it's a tailored portfolio, I don't think it's even worth the money to bring it to a career fair. Because you really won't have that chance to really show them anything. They'll just care more about your resume, and it just gets lost in a pile. I mean, it might work for some people, but for me, because of the craziness of career fair, that situation wouldn't be the best place to do that. It really more appropriate for one-on-one interviewing, one-on-one networking, or a small group interviewing, whatever it may be, but not at a career fair situation. So. Sorry, Greg, that I had to.
No worries. Thank you.
Um,
It might be a full screen issue. Maybe if you minimize from full screen, it'll help. Not sure though.
yeah, it was there like earlier, and then I don't know why it
Yeah,
disappeared.
I can let you know if
Um,
more questions come in
all
periodically.
right, all right, sure. Thank you. Oh, now I think I can see it. All right.
Perfect.
Um,
Oh,
could,
we got a question.
yes, yeah. Could we add research project we have done with others? Absolutely. I mean, the research assistant, I didn't do that on my own. I was definitely part of a research, so that's absolutely, you can definitely put that. And let's say like the first research assistant I was published in, so that my name was in there. The second one, I don't think he ever published, or my name was on it. I don't know. But so it's not like someone could look me up for proof of that. But I do have a reference for that. But I would say, yeah, you can definitely, as long as you're a part of that project, you absolutely can. Okay, so the SWOT analysis, this is helpful in for professional development or if you're switching careers. And this helps you. And for me, switching from higher education to corporation was a big step. And a lot of people, it's not so easy to do that. And I find like the portfolio really helped me seamlessly do that because it made me look more organized and so forth. So when you use a career portfolio, these are the 4 places that I find most helpful, like informational networking events, job interviews, performance appraisal. That's definitely something that I've taken with me when it's time for a performance appraisal with my supervisor, and professional development meeting, whatever that would include for you. But let's say, you're working with, for me, like when I'm working for this new program, the tech leadership program, I bring portfolios to talk about sort of what we're doing with the program, and they could visually see like the flyers we put out there and information we put out there versus just talking about it. It's for me, visualizing really helps a lot of people make things a lot more factual when you're speaking about them. And so this is where sort of career portfolio, but these are the more 4 most appropriate places to do career portfolio. And it really, what you put out there when you're in your home portfolio, you can put anything you want, like what projects that you've worked on, even though they're sensitive materials, they're for you to see. But when you are tailoring it to an employer or a professional, you have to be mindful of. So that way you're not putting sensitive material out there that someone will see that you don't necessarily know. So the home portfolio will include everything, even if you find like it's sensitive material, because that's a portfolio for yourself. But for the ones that you're going to put out there, whether it's a performance appraisal, job interview, or so forth, that has to be mindful that what you're putting out there is not sensitive information. And hopefully you can, if you don't know what that is, then obviously you can talk with one of the career counselors and or a professional that you know that can give you sort of what would be appropriate, what would not be appropriate. But hopefully what sensitive material shouldn't be out there. All right, another question before we move to the next slide. What if you want to add a document or visual aid indicating you've accomplished a task during your career, but you don't have access to the document or visual aid? Materials you can't bring home due to send. Absolutely. So in this point, you would just recreate it for yourself. Because for example, like when I was at Bloomberg, you can never send anything to yourself. And so, those things you would have to sort of basically recreate it to some degree, so that when you are going to talk to someone about what it is that you're about to talk about, they can visually see it. So it doesn't have to be exact. The document doesn't have to be the exact same thing that you're used. So let's say the PowerPoint that I have there, that I don't know where that slide is now. I don't know where that PowerPoint is. I'll just end up recreating a PowerPoint deck and put some bullets, what I presented in there. And then that might be the only way to do it because I don't have access to that PowerPoint slide anymore. So in this case, if it is something, you would just have to recreate it so that you would put that portfolio in. And that's a good example, because then you want to make sure you have it somewhere, because maybe 5 years later, you'll forget what that thing is that you were working on. But in your home portfolio, really it's everything, because that's for you privately. But be mindful that when you're doing it outside of your privacy, you want to make sure that you tailor what content is in there. Okay. All right. So for any project. So this is really school projects, Lynda projects, Coursera project, any other learning platform out there. So whatever project, SAMI project, like Excel projects, because that again, the home portfolio includes everything you could think of that you want to make sure you don't forget or is relevant to you talking about it. Like let's say you did Coursera I mean, if it's like Excel, you're not going to put like everything from beginner, intermediate to expert, but you'd probably just put the expert in there, because by then you don't need to talk about the entry or the intermediate. So be mind, that's what you would organize. But in the beginning, don't worry about that. Just put everything together, because what I find when I'm working with people who I suggest, please create a career portfolio, they always look at that organization as an obstacle. They find like, oh my God, then I gotta get a cover page, then I gotta get a binder, gotta get a divider, all that stuff. When you start thinking of it that way, that's a hurdle and a challenge for a lot of people. So for me, just get a binder, get a folder, whatever it is to get started, and just put everything in there. And this is something I've worked with 5 people recently on getting a career portfolio, and I think we've been talking about it like 3-4 months now before COVID, and they still haven't even gotten started. So what I do, and every time I ask them why, they'll say, yeah, I have to order Amazon, I got to order this, and it just takes time. I always forget to get the clips and the binders. So I would say for me, if you just have a place you can start putting stuff in a corner of your apartment, your house, a folder, whatever, just to get started, that's the first step. Just start gathering materials and put it in one place, and then work on organizing it later. And I find that's a better way to start your portfolio. All right, so going back, interview portfolio. So the interview portfolio has to be tailored. It can't be everything. So you got to be specific, and the best way to tailor it, look at the job description, circle the skills that they're looking for, the experience that they're looking for, and use your experience to tailor the content based on that. You want to customize it, it should be informative, and absolutely it should be organized. So it's your responsibility to put it in an order you think is appropriate. And what I find for me, the minimum things in there, it should be a cover letter, a resume, some things, some projects, some things you're working on. Those are the 3 things that you should put in there. I would not necessarily just randomly, without them asking for it, put a reference page in there, but maybe put it in there, and then you could provide it later. Bring it with you in an interview, but not necessarily in the portfolio. That's the only thing that I would probably not automatically put in there. The professional development and networking, that inclusive. So that basically, again, is everything. And be mindful that it be organized. Eventually, in the beginning, you just want to put everything in there, but eventually you do want to make sure you're putting a cover page, making sure you're putting a table of content, make sure that you do categorize it so that you're not just putting everything in one category. And then once you have everything in there, I find that you could start dividing it. Organically, it'll start creating categories for you. Once you see what everything is that you put in, you could put presentations together. You can put projects that you've done together separately, your leadership things. So even if you're like volunteering somewhere, let's say a lot of professionals are either their board members or volunteering somewhere, you want to maybe take a screenshot of that organization. That way you can either print that, you can paste that on a Word document and then print it, because you never know if that organization might not be in business next year or in a couple of months because of COVID. So at least that website might not be working anymore. But if you take a screenshot of that organization and then transfer it to a Word document, print it and put it in your portfolio, you have a copy of that so you can talk to people about that volunteer experience. So, because there are people who volunteer, and that's a great way to network, and that's a great way to enhance your background and your professional development. But if it's a nonprofit, they might go bust with situation like what we're experiencing now with COVID. What about the email confirmation they sent to us? Can you clarify about what email confirmation you're talking about, maybe, Emily? Yeah, so if you can just follow up with that question, I can definitely answer it. All right, so in a portfolio, so it's not, in your home portfolio, obviously that's for you to see, but if you're networking somewhere, let's say you are a software engineering, you're looking to get a career in marketing, and then you don't really have any marketing friends. So you looked on LinkedIn and you found a Jane Doe who is a marketing guru at Amazon, let's say, some company. And now you've outreached to her, and now she's agreed to meet with you to talk about what she's doing there. And then you bring your career portfolio with you. Let's say you meet at Starbucks. You don't want to, obviously you want to talk, you build that rapport with that person, you build a relationship. You don't necessarily want to just shove the portfolio in their, say, hey, take a look at my portfolio. So you want to make sure it is still some form of interviewing. You are building a relationship. So you want to make sure that when you're presenting the portfolio in a professional setting, that you're finding an organic time to do it. So it's not so forced that you want them to look at it. So when you're in a networking event, whether it's at Starbucks, you have that conversation, you're building relationships, you haven't met this person before. This is a person new that you're trying to connect with. But you want them to give you some insights about what you should be doing now with your change of career. So you're using your portfolio to say, these are the things that I've done. I'd love to hear in your perspective what my skills that I've acquired so far is transferable in the next career that I'm trying to start. So you want them to give that perspective because they're a marketing specialist and you're a software engineer, but you never know what what insight they might be able to give you based on your experience, what might be transferable that she's aware of. Okay, so that's one way. But when you're building that relationship in a Starbucks, let's say, and she's giving you 20 minutes to talk to her, at the end, once you're building relationships, what I find at the end of that relationship building, towards the end of that meeting, what I find the most appropriate way to ask whether they have time is like, I don't know if you have a few more minutes. The verbiage I would actually say is, I don't know if you have a few more minutes, but I brought a portfolio of my experiences and the things that I've worked on in my career. I don't know if you have a few minutes to take a quick look to see where you think my transferable skills might be based in marketing. So those are some of the verbiage I might say to someone before saying, hey, can you look at my portfolio? You don't want to just say that because that's too forced. So the organic way is, would be the nicer, softer ways to ask if they have more time to review your portfolio. Almost always, if it's the rapport you built is positive and it's in that direction, most people will take a few more minutes to give you that direction. And hopefully it'll lead to a second meeting, and then they'll be able to know that you want them to look at your portfolio. Before I go and move on, what about the email they sent to us for the events we volunteer? I would say no, because if it's like heavy text, that heavy text things are more appropriate for your home portfolio. But if it's heavy text, people aren't really going to read everything that's in that text in a networking or interview. So when you are giving a portfolio, it's much more visual. It's a little more less text. That definitely stay away from text heavy content. And that's where, when I showed the decks of my business etiquette workshop, you saw that there were really only 5 bullet points because it's easy to scan and easy to see. But if it was an email confirmation, the purpose of it is like not to convince them that you really volunteered there or you work there. It's just that if they see like a picture of a homepage of an organization, it gives that sort of evidence that you did work there, volunteer there. It's not proof per se, because if they'd really want proof, they'll ask for a reference check. But for the most part, an email confirmation would be too heavy text for a portfolio. So that wouldn't be appropriate. But that would be fine for you for your home portfolio if you need it. Now, separate from the networking, let's say it's a real interview and you brought your portfolio, and I brought my portfolio. I've been using my portfolio for over 15 years, and I've used it for higher education jobs, corporate jobs, and so forth. And everyone has appreciated and really enjoyed reading it. And I find, like, fortunately, I've gotten every job I interviewed so far, and I'm fortunate that way. But of course, I also apply for jobs that I qualify for. So I guess maybe that's the other thing. But it is useful. So when you go for an interview, again, you don't want to just say, hey, I have my portfolio, here you go. You don't want to do that. That's definitely very aggressive. It's, it could be seen very rude. So you want to make sure you find an opening, and so it happens much more organically. And for me, what I do is when I sit down for an interview, I put it in front of me, and I always bring a Padfolio anyway to have something to write with and write on with copies of my resume. But I put my Padfolio on top of my career portfolio. And when I sit down, I sort of separate the two, so they're basically in front of me. And the interviewer, whoever it is I'm talking to, will eventually look at what is this, or make comments about it. And that's sort of the organic way, to bring it up. is if they bring it up. So for me, have it visible in an interview so they can see what it is with a cover page that says what it is. But then also, if it doesn't go there, let's say they're not biting, they're not asking about it, at the end is where you would sort of bring up like, oh, I brought a portfolio. It's for you. I would leave it here for you as a copy for yourself. But if you want to take a couple minutes, we can look over some of the things that I put in there for you. And almost always they'll take the time to look at it. They're not going to extensively look at it, but they will still look at it. Even if it's a company that says they have a policy that they don't take things like that for whatever reason, some of CUNY does have that policy, they will still note that you had that portfolio. So it's not a waste. So even if you went for an interview and you brought it and they said, oh, no, sorry, we can't take that. They can't take it, that they can still look at it. So that doesn't stop them from looking at it, but they might not be able to take it. And so that still works to you as a candidate. So even though they don't take it, it's still something that is beneficial for you as a candidate. So don't worry about if you heard that a company doesn't really accept career portfolios, they don't keep it, but they will almost always look at it. So that's something that is important, okay? So these are the 3 portfolio, for example. So when I did my career portfolio for higher education, these are some of the things that I would include, depends on the position within higher ed. Those are like 4 things I might include in there. In recruiting, these are some of the things for the recruiting jobs that I would apply for. These, for the ones I did apply, these are some of the things that I would include in there. And for diversity, whenever the diversity manager, these are the things that I would include in there. So depending, you're not putting a lot of, in your home portfolio, my home portfolio, I have tons of pages, tons of content in there. It's crazy to bring that in an interview. So you definitely don't want to do that. You would bring a specific, customized, tailored portfolio for interviewing. The only time I would suggest that you bring your home portfolio is if you have a mentor that you're working with, and then you've already have a relationship with this mentor. They already know you. So bringing the home portfolio, meaning they'll actually take time to go over your portfolio, and you want them to review whatever you're reviewing. So you can say like, you know what, I feel like I'm ready for a move, but I don't know what my next step may be. And I need a sounding board. I need a professional to work with me to figure out what it is, or even a career counselor can work with you. And then he or she can go through it with you and then talk about whether you're switching a career to say, hey, I want to be a software engineer. I'm a software engineer, but I want to be in marketing. You can go through your portfolio, your home portfolio together, and think about the things that you could be talking about in networking events or interviewing that are transferable. So that's one thing. And then, you know, so the home portfolio is really only, you can bring that in like a mentor meeting. And everyone, if you don't have one, I always suggest have one. Obviously, just don't go out there and be like, hey, I want you to be a mentor, but you want to build a relationship with someone that you find is a seasoned professional, that you respect their opinion, and then you start to build that relationship with that person. So in time, they become your mentor. So we have another question. Do you recommend having a digital career portfolio as well, or should it be just a hard? For me, people don't like to look at people, because then, in my experience, obviously that's great for different careers. Like if you're a photographer, you're going to have a digital career portfolio, things like that. So there are certain places that you absolutely have to have both. Certain industries are conducive to that. But for, let's say, higher education, unless it's like social media related, so unless the industry or the position is really conducive to that, like an art, social media, and so forth, that would make sense to have a digital portfolio and a physical portfolio. But for like, if you're trying to get a job as a teaching job, if you're trying to become an accountant or finance or a software engineer, it wouldn't make sense to have that. A software engineer, you would probably have a GitHub account or something like that. But there, for me, other than social media or something related to digital, where you're a photographer or a caterer, something of that sort, where you probably have to have a digital career portfolio / website, then you want to have both. But for me, like, it's like, it has helped me figure out what I want to do with my career, what's missing. Like when I was doing higher ed for a number of years, you know, when it was ready for me to change, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And when I look at my portfolio and my experiences that I have, it made sense for me to sort of transition into corporation and recruiting. And that was something that was important to me. And that's where I would flip through it with I've done it recently with my mentor and say, hey, down the road, I want to be this. Right now, this is what I'm doing. What are some things that's missing here, you think, to make sure that I'm competitive for that position? Because I know that he is well aware of that position. So I know that I would respect that, if you wanted a job in that, these are the experiences that you would need to have, X, Y, and Z. So yeah, so that's the breakdown. The other thing with the professional development. So for me, like, I didn't love this visual thing, but I created it anyway. But I would say, like, look at your first job that you've had, and then start connecting the dots about what's your ideal job towards the end when you're ready to retire. I mean, most people have more than 4 jobs in their career, but this is a great sort of visual just to let you know, like, okay, here's job 1. This is my first job out of grad school. All right. And I took this job, then I took this job. But in the end, I really want this job. This is how I want to end my career, that last job position. So what are the jobs I need to be doing in order to get there? Because if I have job 1 and 2, but I don't have job 3 and 4, I'll probably never get to that point that I'm trying to get. And so that's where, again, visually versus just sitting in your couch and trying to think what your next step is. For a lot of people, just not having something visual, nothing tangible to work with, it's too ambiguous for a lot of people. So by then they just sort of give up. So for me, when you're thinking about something, whatever that change would be professionally, it helps with that visual sort of image to help you with that. So, all right, so what's next after this workshop? You meet with, one of the things you can do, you can always meet with a career counselor wherever that may be to review it. That's important because you don't want to just say, hey, my portfolio looks great and assume it's great. You want to make sure you have a professional that you respect their opinion to give you feedback on it before you start using it and putting it out there. Practice using it. Don't assume like what's in there. But when you're going to a networking event, it's best to practice it with someone that you know versus it's trying to do a trial run with someone you don't know. So when you do eventually create a portfolio and you're going to use it for a networking event, you're going to use it for a networking meeting or an interview meeting, make sure you practice using it. So that what I mean by that is, like, even though you've created maybe 10 pages worth of a portfolio that you can give to someone, the last thing you want to do is be trying to flip through it, trying to find where it is. So that's what I mean. It's like knowing exactly, like, when you flip, you know where it is versus trying to flip through it, trying to find the content that you're looking for. And that's where the practice comes in. Ask for feedback. Mock interview. A lot of places have, one of the things that we have in our office, I don't know about the other office within Baruch, we do have an online mock interview module where you can actually record yourself. And then it basically gets uploaded into the cloud rather than your hard drive, so it's not taking too much data. And you could actually you can watch yourself sort of be interviewed. Did someone have a question? I heard something. And that's a good way to practice. That way it's like, if you don't have anyone that you could practice with because we're all stuck at home, you can always do a Zoom meeting with someone you know, or do that mock interview module in the Starr Search. One question: what if you want to meet with your career advisor to get feedback, but you can only meet with them virtually due to COVID? That's great, because nowadays, if a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in that panel presentation on June 4th is, networking in times of COVID, and everything's going to be pretty much virtual. So this would be a good time to show someone, maybe instead of having it as a physical portfolio, you might just have to put it on slides like I'm doing now, putting the content within the slide for now, and then you're visually doing it. But for me, I don't know if you hear that. I know it's 7 o'clock and people are cheering for the first responders in my neighborhood. They're very gung-ho about that, which is great. So if you hear cowbells and pots and everything, that's not me. That's my neighbors. But yeah, absolutely. And for me, eventually it's going to be paper. But for me, if you give someone a website or a link to look at, a lot of them find like you're giving me work to do. So you don't that's where the website doesn't really come in, because you feel like you're giving them work. But in a meeting, like a Zoom meeting, you might want to just put some slides together, like we're doing, of things you want to talk about. rather in one place, rather than trying to figure out where it is within your desktop and so forth. So if you are going to do networking event and you want some feedback on it, it's your responsibility to put it in decks, images within the decks to look at together, versus trying to like click on different things to look for the person to look at. So that's probably the more of the digital portfolio, I would say. Okay. Bring it to job. Okay, so we talked about that. So these are some of the resources. We in Starr, we service any alumni that works that that did their undergraduate at Baruch College, and those are, because of that, you have access to these services. I don't know for graduates, like the graduate school career services, they have their own, and they have other services, I'm sure very similar to ours. But we in Starr, we have the mock interview module that's free, where you can just basically access it under resources, and then you basically record yourself, and then you have that link. And what's great about that is, again, it doesn't take up data on your computer and so forth, but you can actually send a link to anyone, and they can review that mock interview that you just sort of did. Going Global is a free resource for anyone that's looking for jobs outside of the United States. So if I'm looking for a job in London, but I don't know what job database they use there and things like that, or what the expected behavior in interviews might be, Going Global would be a great resource for that. Focus 2 is a self-assessment. This is for people to say, you know what, I'm an accountant, but I hate it. I don't want to be an accountant anymore. What do you think I should do next? What should I do next? Online career assessments gives you a better understanding of your values, your interests, and your personality a little bit. This Focus 2, it's not focused on personality per se, but it is a career assessment to understand your values and your interests, and sort of how that translates into the world of work. And what's awesome with that is connected to the Department of Labor, and it gives you super extensive information about any career that's out there. So if it's a job as a, as a FBI agent or something like that, it's in there, and then you would click on that, and it'll actually give you like, what degrees do you need? What do you do on a daily basis? What skills are expected of you? So that's one way that you can access. It's an online resource guide for different industries. All right, so this is the time, the presentation's over. Anyone have any questions? You can either type it in the chat or just verbalize it with whatever we've been presented on, what I presented on today. So. Everyone good? No one has any questions? That's good. All right, well, if you can, I'm gonna put this in the chat. Hopefully it works. If you wouldn't mind filling out this online survey, it's a Qualtrics survey. You don't put your name on it. It's not attached to anything once you get it. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna put this in the chat, and that way you can fill it out for me. That'd be wonderful. I'm still on, so I can still answer any questions if anyone has any.
Marion, this is Greg. Just wanted to say that there are a couple of questions. Folks were asking if they can set up a meeting with you to review a portfolio.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you can definitely make an appointment through Starr Search. So if you don't have a Starr Search account, you can email my office, which I'm going to put here, to set up an account first. My God, I forgot our baruch@baruch.cuny.edu, I believe is our. But you can always email me. That's the email that you would to set up an account. They have some certain information that they need to get from you before they can set up a Starr Search account. And so please, you can definitely do that. Let me just fill out this.
As a quick clarification of, or not clarification, but to further explain the difference with undergrad versus graduate. The people who are graduate alumni, having graduated with a graduate degree, you have access to your particular school, Weissman, Zicklin, etc., to set up an appointment with a career counselor there. And then all those who were undergrads from Baruch who graduated have access to Starr, which is where Marion is in. So that's how that breakdown goes.
Yeah, it's just we're not we're decentralized career services in Baruch, so we're not all in one section. So we, like Greg said, there are career services for Weissman, career services, graduate career services for Weissman, and graduate career services for the Zicklin.
Yeah, and Marks as well. And if you guys have any additional questions about that, or need some help knowing who to go to, feel free to reach out to the Alumni Relations Office as well, because we're happy to help facilitate that and make sure you're speaking to the right person. We did get a question. Someone asked, sorry if you already talked about this, but this person says, I have a personal website. Should I still create my career portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the website is different because a website is great. You put that on a business card. You put that, you know, a LinkedIn could be your personal website too for professional reasons. But again, if you're like a photographer, something of that sort of career, you need a website. It's not a career portfolio. You would bring a portfolio with you, depending, right? You would talk about your work and so forth. That's a portfolio. But it really, for me, it's for every industry. I mean, I think a portfolio has always been popularized in like arts, the arts career. But I think that, I mean, software engineers use this because, you know, people want to see your codes. Definitely for marketing, accounting. You know, you're not putting like a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to put people personal data in an accounting. Absolutely, you should never do that. But you, depending what it is your code showcase, you can always replace those content with something so they can just visually see what you've done. That's what they need to see. Finance people, you know, people will say, well, I do my own personal investments, like, you know, small ones, like you can do with the app Robinhood, right? You can start with $100 or something like that. And you can create like an investor portfolio with something that small. So that investor portfolio is something you could put definitely in a career portfolio, in an interview a portfolio versus, and also in your home portfolio. So really, people in finance can easily, there's so many things that they can do. I have an alumni that I was working with. He's a real estate agent, and he wants to do more finance. That's, you know, there are real estate finance stuff, but he did a lot of like reporting on the market for real estate, and he would send that out to people. And I said, well, that's definitely, that information you definitely want to put in your portfolio when you're interviewing, but also in your home portfolio. So that's like something specific that's definitely relevant for him because he's looking for a financial analyst position. And so that, like that reporting, that real estate report that he writes is absolutely very relevant in finance, even though it's about real estate in general. I graduated so here's a question. I graduated many years ago now. I'm a member of the Baruch Alumni Association. What info is needed for the Starr account? I don't know, but because I don't set up those accounts, but definitely they need to obviously vet you to make sure you got your degree there. So I think they need to look up some data from you. I don't know what point. They're not extensive. There's a few things that they need from you to set up that account. But basically, if you no matter when you graduate, we do have people in Star Search. I think the oldest graduate that I've ever worked with graduated in 1972. So I don't know. So we have, it's not an issue getting, I'm not that old. Great. I'm glad to hear you're not that old.
Karen, I'll look into also figuring out exactly what we need from you to make that happen. Because I know that alumni do get access to Starr.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a quick process. I'll make sure I look into it and we can follow up with you.
Yeah. And when you email, that email that I sent, if you don't get a response, just send my email, I thought I sent my email, but I will, let me go back to that slide. I'm not in, I can't remember if am I still sharing my screen?
No,
I can't even remember. Okay. Or, cause I know I think you were doing that earlier, but cause I think my email is there. So I don't know if you wanna, it's all right. But let me just cut and paste my email, but my email, because I think most of the RSVP came from you, right, Greg?
Yes, although I think your email was in the confirmation as to direct questions to you ahead of time.
Let me just type it in the chat box. So if there's anything, even after we all get off the call, you're like, oh man, I wish I asked that question. You can always send me an email. We can definitely dialogue over email.
So, you know, on the there should be, I think the Starr Center would have more information about what needs to be done. I'll look into that, about how to get you the Starr
Yeah.
account, and
Yeah.
we can pass that along in the follow-up email after this.
Yeah. And so the other thing I'd like to, pitch out there, again, if depending where you are in your career, what you're looking for, if doing the professional volunteer that I mentioned earlier today, that's a great way to sort of engage our students. We have tons of professionals and alumni that come back and sort of help with our student different capacity, and that's in the link that Greg put up there. That's our homepage, and it's under the alumni tab under mentoring. You fill out that sort of online profile with your name and graduation date. You don't have to be a Baruch alum, so if you have a professional that you know that you work with, we're happy to sort of figure out a way to get you, help our students. So we have tons of things, so depending on your area of expertise. So and I find like that being part of that professional network, we have tons of professionals that can give back. That's a program that I created in Starr, and it's been very successful. I think we've been doing it for about 5 years now. And I would say it's award winning because I put a proposal and I got an award. So any other questions? If not, I'll stick around as long as anybody are still in the call, but otherwise, you're welcome to have a good evening.
Yeah,
So,
and if you have
around.
any additional questions following up, you guys can feel free to email Marion or myself.
Yeah.
And the alumni office, and we can definitely look into making sure you guys can get your alumni account for Starr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and please, we have 2 other events coming up. So if you are interested, please attend the salary negotiation and the professional networking panel. That's usually pretty well attended. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Please fill out the survey if you can. Thank you. That'd be great.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Marion.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Greg. All right. Perfect. Have a good evening, everyone.
Take care.